This is the mini lesson on the basics of fingerprints. So there's three fundamental principles that criminal investigators follow when they're looking at fingerprints. First, a fingerprint is an individual characteristic. What that means is that no two people have been found with the exact same fingerprint pattern. Even identical twins who have the same DNA will have different fingerprint patterns. Two, a fingerprint pattern will remain unchanged for the life of an individual. Now, that doesn't mean that it won't have changes due to permanent scars or skin disease, but the pattern should remain unchanged besides these two instances. And three, fingerprints have general characteristic ridge patterns that allow them to be systematically identified. And that's what we're going to go into right now. So, some interesting factoids about fingerprints. We're going to be classifying them on three different patterns. And we can look at these patterns, and one of them is more prominent in the population, loops. About 60% of people will have loops, but 35% of people will have whorls. The most uncommon pattern are arches. Only 5% of the population have arches. And did you know that the study of fingerprint identification is known as dactyloscopy? And when police investigators are collecting fingerprints, those are known as dactylograms, fingerprints, but a more scientific word. All right, let's look at the different classes of fingerprint patterns. Arches will have two subgroups below it, and we're going to get into that in a second. Second grouping is loops, and you have two subgroups of loops. And then finally, whorls, and you have four different types of whorls. Now, arches are the simplest type of fingerprints, but they're also the most rare. So arches are formed by ridges that will enter on one side of the fingerprint and exit on the other side. You can see that this, like a little hill, comes in on one side, makes a little upward motion, and comes out the other side of the fingerprint. So this is a plain arch. Ridges enter on one side, exit on the other side. So another type of arch are known as tented arches. Basically, you have a steeper hill. So you can see you're going to have like a tent in the middle, comes in on the left side, exits on the right side. So similar to a plain arch, except it has that spike in the center. Now, loops are patterns that will have one delta and one or more ridges that enter and leave on the same side of the print. So a delta is something that looks like the shape of a delta symbol or a triangle. So here you see a delta. And we have ridges that are going to enter and leave on the same side of the print. So it makes this loop. And over here you see the same thing, a loop. So these patterns are named for their positions related to the radius and ulnus bone in your forearm. So if you were to hold out your hand, this is showing the left hand, the radius bone is going to be closest to your thumb side, and the ulna bone is the bone that's on your pinky side. And that's how we will classify these loops, as either ulnar loops or radius loops. So let's look at this pattern here on the left. This is our delta, and you can see that the loop comes from this side and exits on this side. So that is the right side of the print. Now, whether it's radial or ulnar depends on which hand this is a fingerprint from. So remember your left and your right. So if this is a left-handed print, this would be on the thumb side, so it would be a radial loop. But if this was a right-handed print, notice if you come and leave on this side, the right side, that is the pinky side, that would be an ulnar loop. Over here on the right, here's our delta, here's our loop. It enters and exits on the left side of the print. So if this is a left-handed print, that's going to be an ulnar loop. And if this is a right-handed print, that's going to be a radial loop. Whorls. All right, so whorls are going to have at least one ridge that makes a complete circuit. So a complete circuit would think of a circle, a full circle. And they need to have at least two deltas. If it has more than two deltas, it's going to be an accidental whorl. So I've got two different prints showed here. And the trick with identifying whorls is you're going to locate your deltas. So here I've got one delta and my second delta. And then I'm going to draw a line connecting those deltas. And here you see the complete circuit, or the concentric circles making the whorl. So if the line drawn between the two deltas passes through the circles in the pattern, that's known as a plane whorl, because you can see the line from delta to delta will pass through the central pocket of these whorls. However, on this right side, I've got this delta, and I draw a line, and the curved ridges or whorl pattern doesn't touch the line. So when it doesn't touch the line, that's known as a central pocket whorl. So another type of whorl, you can have delta or double loop whorls. So here's my deltas, and notice I have a whorl here and a whorl here. So that would be a double loop whorl. It's coming in, and then it's kind of a circular pattern. Accidental whorls contain two or more patterns, not including the plane arch, and they don't fall under any of the other categories. So if it doesn't fit any of the other categories, you will get a accidental whorl. So you can see here that you have a delta, you have a whorl, you have your ridges, another delta, and it looks like another delta over here. So you have more than two deltas, you've got some whorls, you got some loops. This is going to be an accidental whorl. All right, guys, so you have 5 fingerprint patterns here that I want you to identify. Pay attention to left hand and right hand and answer it in your notes.